Two racist policemen thought he was just another black man they could humiliate. They didn't know he was an undercover FBI agent, and their mistake would cost them everything. On a warm afternoon in California, the park was bustling with families enjoying picnics, children laughing, and people soaking up the sunshine. Amid this serene setting, two white police officers began patrolling, their attention drawn to a black man sitting quietly on a bench. To them, he didn't belong in their version of this picturesque scene. Without any reason, they approached him, their faces twisted with smug arrogance. The man, calm and composed, looked up as they started questioning him. Their tone wasn't one of concern or genuine curiosity, it was laced with condescension. "What are you doing here?" one of them barked, ignoring the peaceful scene around him. He tried to explain he was there to relax after a long week, but they weren't interested in his story. Things quickly escalated. The officers accused him of loitering, even though the park was public and he hadn't done anything remotely suspicious. They demanded his ID, and when he hesitated, one of them threatened, "If you've got nothing to hide, why are you making this difficult?" The tension grew, drawing the attention of nearby onlookers. But as people watched, most remained silent, fearful of getting involved. When the man handed over his ID, they sneered at his name, making snide comments under their breath. One officer shoved him back onto the bench, accusing him of resisting, even though he had done no such thing. The man's calm demeanor seemed to enrage them further. They wanted to provoke a reaction, but he refused to give them one. Instead, he asked calmly, "What exactly have I done wrong?" This only fueled their aggression. "You don't get to question us," one officer spat. Without any clear reason, they decided to arrest him, twisting his arms behind his back and slamming him against the bench. People nearby gasped, some pulling out their phones to record, but the officers didn't care. Their power was on full display, and they reveled in it. As they led him to their patrol car, they mocked him openly. One officer joked, "Bet this guy has a record a mile long," while the other laughed, saying, "He probably doesn't even know what a job is." The man didn't respond, his silence now filled with quiet confidence that seemed to unsettle them. At the station, their insults continued. They made him sit in a cell for hours without explanation, periodically coming by to taunt him. "How's it feel to finally be where you belong?" one sneered. But what the officers didn't know was that every word, every action, and every insult was being documented. The man wasn't just any ordinary person. He had prepared for moments like this. Hidden in plain sight, he carried a truth that would soon flip their world upside down. The officers had no idea they were dealing with someone who could see through every move they made. As they sat behind their desks, laughing about their so-called catch of the day, the man sat quietly in the holding cell. He wasn't rattled or defeated. He was observing, listening, and waiting. Every mocking word, every derogatory comment they made, was fueling the plan that was forming in his mind. As hours passed, the officers became more brazen. They paraded him around the station like a trophy, making jokes about his clothes, his background, and his supposed criminal record. "Bet he's used to handcuffs," one of them quipped, slapping his back with mock enthusiasm. The man, still calm and composed, allowed them to dig themselves deeper into their pit of arrogance. He didn't need to retaliate, not yet. Meanwhile, back in the park, several witnesses who had recorded the arrest began sharing the footage online. Within hours, the videos were gaining traction, sparking outrage on social media. Comments flooded in, calling out the officers' blatant misuse of power. People demanded accountability, but the officers, oblivious to the storm brewing outside, continued their charade. Inside the station, the man asked for a phone call. His request was met with eye rolls and a dismissive laugh. "Who you gonna call your lawyer? Good luck affording one officer sneered. They handed him the phone begrudgingly, convinced that nothing significant would come of it. But the call wasn't to a lawyer, it was to someone much higher up. Moments later, the officers noticed an unusual amount of activity at the station. A few higher-ranking officials walked in, their expressions grave. They demanded to see the man's file. The officers, initially confused, scrambled to comply, trying to hide their growing unease. "What's the big deal? He's just some guy we picked up at the park," one officer said, attempting to downplay the situation. The hireds weren't amused. "Just some guy?" one of them repeated, their voice dripping with disbelief. "Do you even know who he is?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the confidence draining from their faces. When they shook their heads, the official handed them a file. Inside was the man's identification, his identification. He wasn't just a random person in the park. He was a federal FBI agent, undercover for a high-profile investigation. Panic set in as the officers realized the gravity of their actions. Every insult, every moment of humiliation, every baseless accusation, it was all on record, and it had been directed at someone with the authority to dismantle their careers in an instant. The man's silence now made sense. He wasn't powerless, he was calculating. The moment of reckoning arrived in a crowded courtroom. The officers sat stiffly at the defendant's table, their smug expressions replaced by visible unease. The audience was filled with reporters, community members, and advocates, all eager to see justice served. The videos from the park had gone viral, and the entire country was watching. This wasn't just about two cops, it had become a symbol of systemic abuse of power. The courtroom was silent as the judge entered, a stern figure whose reputation for fairness was well known. The black man, now revealed as a high-ranking FBI agent, took the stand. He carried himself with calm confidence, a stark contrast to the officer's tense demeanor. As he began to recount the events of that day, his voice was steady but filled with purpose. He detailed how the officers had targeted him without cause, mocked his identity, and escalated the situation without any justification. The prosecution then presented the evidence. Video recordings from bystanders showed the officers' aggressive behavior in stark detail, the mocking tone, the baseless accusations, and the unnecessary force. Each clip painted a damning picture of the officers' actions, leaving no room for denial. But the most powerful moment came when the FBI agent revealed his identity and mission. He explained that he had been working undercover on a case involving corruption in law enforcement. Ironically, the officers who had arrested him were part of a system he was investigating. "You didn't just abuse your power," he stated, looking directly at them. "You exposed the exact problem I was working to uncover." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The officers' faces turned pale as they realized the magnitude of their mistake. Their attorney attempted to argue that they had acted in the line of duty, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge, unimpressed by their excuses, questioned their judgment. "Your duty is to protect and serve, not to humiliate and harm without cause," she said sharply. The final blow came when the prosecution revealed the officers' records. Complaints from other civilians about similar incidents painted a clear pattern of misconduct. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a habitual abuse of power. The courtroom was tense as the judge delivered her verdict. The officers were found guilty of misconduct, racial profiling, and abuse of power. Their badges, once symbols of authority, were stripped away in disgrace. The judge's final words echoed through the room. "This court will not tolerate those who tarnish the trust placed in law enforcement. Justice has been served today." As the officers were led away, the FBI agent stood tall, his quiet strength a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding him. The courtroom erupted in applause, not just for him, but for what he represented, a fight against injustice and the hope for a better system. This wasn't just their fall, it was a turning point for everyone watching. Justice had been served, and the truth had prevailed. The officers' arrogance had led to their downfall. exposing the deep flaws in a system meant to protect. The FBI agent's quiet dignity reminded everyone that strength doesn't always come from loud defiance. It comes from standing firm for what's right. This wasn't just an ending, it was a powerful lesson for all. Subscribe for more stories that expose the truth and challenge the world to change. Please note, this is not a real story. It's a work of fiction only for education and entertainment purposes.